Perfect. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We are so thrilled that you all are able to join us this morning for our budget season, How Local Governments Can Build and Maintain Fiscal Health webinar. This webinar is offered in partnership with the Institute for Local Government and HDL Companies. So we are going to kick things off. My name is Taylor Buck. I am a program manager at the Institute for Local Government, and I will be serving as your host and moderator today. Really happy that you all have been able to join us. To give you a quick overview of what we'll cover in today's webinar, we're going to start off today, of course, with our welcome and a little bit of audience engagement with some polling questions. So we hope you all are able to join us and join in those polling questions. And then we'll kick into our discussion around sales tax trends, business license trends, and economic trends. And throughout, we will hear some really excellent important case study from the city of Pacific Grove, who will share their insights about all of these different trends and what it means for cities on the ground. And then we will round out our session today with an audience Q&A, and we will wrap things up. So a couple of quick housekeeping items, just so that for folks who might not be familiar with GoToWebinar, all webinar participants will be muted during the entirety of the webinar. But if you have any questions for our panel for that audience Q&A portion, please include them in the question box shown here on the screen, which is located in your toolbar. The moderator will read your questions, and I'll be sure to do our best to fit as many as we can in at the end of the webinar. And then for folks who might be wondering, we are recording this session and we will be providing the slide deck presentation after this. So be sure to stay tuned. That information will be arriving to you via email in the coming days. And to quickly share just a little bit about the Institute for Local Government, we are a nonprofit training and education affiliate of the League of California Cities, the State Association of Counties, and the California Special Districts Association. We serve over 2,500 local agencies throughout California, and we're really all about providing the best resources and events like these webinars, so local agencies can really be successful implementing their policies and engaging with their communities on the ground. And to give a quick overview, we have 4 program areas, sometimes referred to as our pillar programs of leadership and governance, civics education and workforce, public engagement, and sustainable and resilient communities. And we offer a variety of services related to those program areas, including our training efforts, technical assistance and grant support, capacity building, and of course, convenings. And really all of this is united by our mission, which is to navigate the complexity and build trust in communities and ensuring local governments have all of the resources they need to do so. So we are going to kick things off and share a little bit about our today's presenters. I will share their names and affiliations, and of course, for our panelists on the line, please feel free to share any more bio info that you would like when you share your remarks. But we have Ben Harvey on the line today. He is a city manager at the city of Pacific Grove. We have Bobby Young, Director of Client Services, Sales Tax over at HDL Companies. We have Barry Foster, Principal and Managing Director of Econ Solutions at HDL Companies. And rounding out our lineup today, we have Eric Myers, Director of Operations, Tax and Fee Administration, also at HDL Companies. Thank you all for joining us today. So before we kick things over to our panelists, we do just want to get a little bit of information about who's in the room and ask some questions around our webinar topic today, just to see where our attendees are at. And so I will toss it over to my colleague, Melissa, who will launch those polling questions for us. Whenever they're ready, we just ask that our attendees answer those questions as they pop up on your screen.
Good morning, everybody. You should see the first one up on your screen. So I'll give you just a few seconds here to vote and share this information with us. Almost everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and close this and then share those results. So you see the vast majority of folks on the line with us this morning are with a city, Then we have some county folks, a few special district folks, and then some other. Okay. Next up, you should see a question around the probability of a recession this year. So we'll give you a few seconds here to share what you're thinking in this space. Almost everybody there. Go ahead and close and share this as well. So about 45% of you think 25%, about a third of folks think 50% or greater, 20% think 10%, and a handful of you don't think that there is that's going to happen this year. I'm going to hide this. So we'll go to the next one up. Okay, so hopefully you now are seeing a question around your key forecasting indicator. Give you a few seconds here. And close this one. We'll share those results as well. A little over half of you use another economic measure as your key forecasting indicator. About a third of folks use past revenue, and about 15% use employment numbers. Just a couple more quick questions for you all. Really appreciate your participation. So what concerns are you hearing from your business community coming out of COVID-19? Just a couple more seconds. Okay. So about 60% of folks are concerned about the cost of goods being sold. The next one up, we have a little over 20% with other, and they see about 10% each for rents, and then grants and government support. And we've got one final question for you. So is your jurisdiction considering tax equity as one of your strategic priorities? Guessing some folks on the line might not know. And so we'll close and we'll share this. So you see about 1/3 to 2/3 breakdown there, with a third of folks yes, considering that a strategic priority, and about 2/3 saying no. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Taylor.
Perfect. Thank you, Melissa. Really appreciate you helping us with those questions. We'll move along here to our presentation, and I will kick it over to Bobby to get us started.
Wonderful. Thank you, Taylor. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning to talk about how local governments can build and maintain fiscal health. Excuse me. Go ahead and go to the next slide there, Taylor. So just a little bit about HDO and kind of who we are. As you see on the screen here, We've been blessed to serve local communities for over 40 years now. We are a 100% employee-owned company, which we are so thankful for, and gives us a lot of value that we continue to put into to our work, helping serve local communities. You can see also on the screen different kind of like who we are and where we serve. Over 700 municipal clients nationwide. We are kind of continuing to expand into multiple states across the country. Over $3 billion recovered on behalf of our clients. And we have such a phenomenal, and we are so thankful to have such a great client retention rate in the for all the services that we provide. And so today we'll be talking a little bit about a few service lines that we have, but definitely feel free to go to our website, hdlcompanies.com, to review and look at all of the services that are available to clients. Let's go ahead and kick into the first section that we'll be talking about, sales tax and the trends statewide, and a little bit more about Pacific Grove, and allow Ben to give his perception and how he views sales tax there in the local community. We like to go ahead and go to the next slide there, Taylor. We do like to talk about sales tax quite a bit, especially here in California, given that it's usually one of the higher revenue pieces that each agency has, but it is also one of the most volatile to economic trends, and when times are good and when times are bad, how might that change revenue flows? As you see on the screen, just a real quick kind of set us up for the data that we're going to see coming up. You can see for Pacific Grove specifically, there in the bottom right, their local sales tax rate is 9.25%. And as you go up into kind of the blue box there, you'll see the local Bradley Burns normal 1% that every agency here in California receives. We'll be looking at some data there. But then also Pacific Grove's local measure A, which is another 1.5% that has been adopted locally. And we'll kind of take a quick look at how those have been trending and helping Ben in some cases, I'm sure most recently, but why it's so important to understand where different pieces of revenue are coming from. Go ahead and go to the next slide there. So real quick, statewide trends. Myself and a couple of other team members, each quarter as we get new data at HDL, statewide data, we put together a webinar. So feel free, I'm going to go through a few slides, talk statewide, but we've got past forecast webinars that we've done on our website, again, hdlcompanies.com, under resources. You'll see past webinars if you want to go into a deeper analysis of the data and the trends that we're seeing. But right at the top of this slide here, you'll see the most recent quarterly trends. To the left side of the line, you'll see Q20, which is the depths of the pandemic that we've went through. Now the inevitable rebound and recovery that's been fairly sustained for two plus years now, excuse me. And the growth that we've been continuing to experience. You also see down below there for the calendar year, the impacts of the pandemic in calendar year 2020. Now the rebound that, again, most communities have felt the recovery all throughout calendar year 21, continued in calendar year 22. It was otherwise the epitome of why we heard about rising cost of goods and inevitable inflation, which we'll talk about, and the Fed's response to that as far as higher interest rates and their desire to slow the economy down. It was great to have those poll questions up at the front and kind of who sees a recession on the horizon, because yes, the whole goal of higher interest rates was to cool off the growth that we've seen, and you see here on this slide. So go ahead, next slide there. And as we look about the entire statewide data, we like to break it down into what we call major industry groups. So that way we can track trends across different industries. And we know some would, especially post-pandemic and the drops that you see there, some industries have rebounded really, really well and eclipsed where they were previously. Other industries, especially like with the county and statewide pools, never took a dip during the pandemic, had a lot to do with AB 147 and new sales tax revenue from out-of-state online retailers. And as local cities or actually local businesses had to close and shut down, couldn't sell goods, a lot of us as consumers shifted over into online, and that's really what has spiked the pools through the pandemic. But most notably, and a lot of what we've been talking about with our clients, is how much certain industries not just recovered, but exponentially drove up. And you'll see that kind of on the green line with autos and transportation. Really, new car sales here way above where they were pre-pandemic. And for your agencies that have had local dealerships, car dealerships, have the same experience. You've seen your revenues shoot up in a like manner. And then the red line down below with fuel and service stations, gas prices definitely drive that line there. And as we experienced in pretty much all of 2020, with crude oil being so high, we've seen sales tax receipts from gas stations really follow that trend. So a lot of good recovery. That kind of the good news, if you will, and I think as we see on the next couple of slides, that how that has trended overall, and then what we see coming up, and why we maybe see more of a slowdown on the horizon. Go ahead and go to the next slide here, Taylor. So when we talk about inflation, it's very they are very interconnected with the idea of inflation, or how inflation happens with sales tax revenue and receipts. So when we've got stronger demand and we have higher prices, it means higher sales tax revenue inevitably. Even as we saw kind of the tightening of supply chain, which then inevitably tightened availability. We then saw higher prices. We still saw higher sales tax revenue. So inflation, while it feels kind of negative, if you will, has actually been a great thing for sales tax, because it's just continued to raise revenue. Again, kind of making that transition over to what the feds are doing on an interest rate level. And on the next slide, we've got some of our bigger topics that myself and our team talk about each quarter. Go ahead and go to the next slide there, Tyler. Yeah, so with the feds raising interest rates to moderate inflation, it likely means that we're going to see a moderation of sales tax revenue, especially sales tax revenue growth. So interest rates are a big consideration for us at HDL. Inflation, overall prices, how is that going to articulate out into consumer spending habits, overall faith and security within the economy? You can see then we're considering saving trends, household saving, household spending, overall debt is something that we really put into our mix when we're considering our forecast overall. Then supply chain, much less of an issue than what it was maybe about a year and a half ago now, but it is always a consideration, because we know that certain industries, especially the auto industry, kind of got hit when it wasn't necessarily as expected. And then most notably throughout the back end of 2022 has been consideration of mortgage rates and what's that going to do for overall available household spending on of disposable income. Probably starts to eat away a little bit at that. Go to the next slide. So as we talk about the consideration of maybe the negative impacts, one thing that has been an absolute positive for us in California is overall unemployment at really historical low unemployment rate overall. You can see there with the line graph to the right how unemployment has trended. The spike that it took during the pandemic, obviously with businesses closed, but immediately dropped right back down to where we were pre-pandemic. We see this as a great sign. As labor markets are tight, that actually has upward pressure on salaries and income, which inevitably gives people money to then go ahead and spend and funnel back into sales tax. So it's one of the brighter aspects that we've seen. You can see the state overall there on the left, most in green areas, which is still really low unemployment rates, and just a couple of counties, maybe a little bit more specific to their industries that have a little bit, unemployment creeping back up to not so desirable levels. Go ahead and go next slide there, Taylor. So our forecast overall on the statewide level, you can see our most recent data quarter was 4Q22. Right there in the middle of the screen, we saw positive 4.7% growth overall. I would then say go ahead and glance to the left, and you can see the dramatic double-digit gains that we experienced via sales tax statewide post-pandemic. So we reopened, we had new tax revenue coming in, and really saw dramatic growth. Now it's starting to cool off, and you can see our forecast. And again, this goes back to the poll question on a recession. For us at HDL, what we're seeing is more of expecting more of a slowdown in overall sales tax revenue, not so much a negative drop, which would maybe be a little bit more consistent with a full defined recession. And even when we go back and look at how the statewide revenues performed during the pandemic, it was a little bit more like a recession rather than a depression or kind of a really big impact. The overall net effect was maybe just a little bit more of a soft recession through the pandemic. And so that's really for us leading in a little bit more to a softer landing from this post-pandemic boom into a slowdown. Again, our webinar on our website kind of goes into more depths and details regarding our overall forecast. Next slide, please. There we go. Oh, on a fiscal year basis. So a lot of you are considering your annual budget next year, especially for fiscal year 23-24. What you see on the screen, we think that fiscal year 22-23, that which we're in right now, gonna finish off fairly steady, as we just saw on the previous screen, about an overall 3.7% growth statewide. Then as we look at 23-24, you can see that cooling off just about a 0.5% gain statewide. Local results may vary depending on your demographic, but then as we go out the next few years, not so much of a recession, more of a return to normal historical growth. As incomes increase, the likelihood costs will either flatten out or get back to more of a CPI type growth, and thereby sales tax revenues will go back into a more normal state. Next slide, please. We'll briefly talk here, and then I'll turn it over to Ben to talk about Pacific Grove. So this is just to give all the viewers a little bit of context about Pacific Grove. As we said, we really do focus on the major industry groups to identify the makeup of the city. And you can see here their largest single sales tax category is restaurants and hotels. For anybody that knows the location of Pacific Grove, it's definitely more of tourism based. You can see the peak there in the third quarter of 22, that which I've got the arrow on, really that summer months, they hit a nice peak rebound for restaurants, and then all the other major categories really kind of playing through and fairly flat. As you glance over to the far right, you'll see the breakdown by quarter and how Pacific Grove has trended post-pandemic. And then on a calendar year basis, you can see below heavily impacted because of the lack of tourism during the pandemic, and then now a nice steady rebound. And I would say not yet a full return. And Ben, you may agree with me here, not yet a full return to that feeling of, oh yeah, we're back to where we were pre-pandemic. On this slide, it kind of shows like just starting to get there.
That's right. I think so. It's very important to know and understand your community, and you have to know it maybe at a different level than even your residents know it. We're a coastal community, Monterey County on the tip of the Monterey Peninsula. We're a visitor-based economy, as Bobby pointed out. But to many people who live here, we're a community of homes. In fact, that's what our charter describes us as. We're not. I mean, being a community of homes, yes, we receive a significant amount of property tax, of course. Our revenue sources are property tax, sales tax, and bed tax, but they're all very important, and we can't survive with only one or two of the three. So when you talk about sales tax, it's hugely important to know, who your drivers are. And in Pacific Grove, yes, it's hotels and it's restaurants. So those are important relationships for the city, important relationships for me, ones that I cultivate. We tried really hard during the pandemic to make sure that we were meeting the needs of those sectors. And in particular, we really paid a lot of attention to creating a thriving parklet scene for our restaurants. And unlike a lot of communities in the state and certainly regionally, we're retaining our parklets. Why? That just simply means more seats. And why are more seats important? Well, more seats mean more sales tax. That's not necessarily why we're doing it, but it is a nice benefit of that. There still are a lot of the public that would prefer to eat outside, even today, even though we think that COVID's behind us. There are many folks, even in a town like Pacific Grove, which doesn't always have the best weather in the world for dining outside. You're going to see people doing it. So thanks for the opportunity there, Bobby.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for that extra kind of local piece, because we've talked to so many of our clients that, yeah, they wanted to give back the parklet space to, maybe even they've got a local parking tax or parking collection. And well, we end up then with one of our other poll questions, which was, how about your business? How are your businesses doing post COVID? And cost is one of them, but then it's maybe in that other 22 is, yeah, how can we get more people into our restaurant, because we know demand is extremely high. And like you had said, well, a continuation of that policy might end up hitting on multiple different pieces of how to have success. One other slide, my next slide, and it'll be my last one and our last one here on sales tax, is the local 1.5% rate that you have there now in Pacific Grove. And if we go back to, we don't need to go back there, but on a previous slide, local voters recently in April of 22 decided to increase your local rate from 1% to 1.5%. Congratulations, and I'm sure that's going to help with fiscal planning and sustainability going forward. But as you see on the screen, breaking down kind of the trend on the 1% as we work into the new rate for you, a little bit different as far as the demographic and the major industry groups and what drives this. Definitely something to consider for local agencies that need more revenue. It's not really just a one-for-one from your local businesses and the local Bradley Burns to a new tax. As you can see here, that one of the larger categories to generate revenue is actually general consumer goods, which for HDL, what we put into there is not just local businesses, but also goods coming from online retailers. And we can all think of the major ones, and they're all lumped in there. So online sales activity, especially during the fourth quarter, the normal holiday shopping period, you can see it really then drives up the transactions use tax, measure A, that you guys have locally, right? And so with restaurants and hotels being the green line and kind of really running through there where they were pre-pandemic to getting back, something hopefully a little closer or eventually get there. But yeah, looking and considering that the makeup and the flow, the trend, how it's going to perform may end up being a little bit different than your local Bradley Burns. Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of that increase in the measure and what's it mean and your aspects?
Sure, I do. Rather infamously, we actually had to go for the increase twice. The first time we went out for the increase, we incorrectly cited the section of the code, and the CDTFA basically said, no, I'm sorry, the wrong code section is the wrong code section. So I have to give our city council a huge amount of credit. They had the courage to actually go back out to the voters again, and they approved it by about the same percentage as the time before, a half-cent sales tax increase. I think there's some reasons for that. We try to be very open and transparent as far as our expenditures and what the taxes are used for. We try to avail ourselves of technologies like ClearGov, so you can easily go see and put together your own financial reports so that it's all clear to you. But it's also important, I think, to know your region. You know, we lag behind our region as far as the sales tax percentage. So that worked in our favor. But famously around here, there have been other sales tax measures, notably recently in Santa Cruz, that you know did not go through. So it's not a slam dunk. You really need to spend some time with your community to make sure that they understand why you would be increasing the tax, what it's going to be used for, and how it's going to benefit them. I think you have to be very clear about that, and then you have to deliver. So yeah, very important.
Wonderful. I think that's it on the sales tax side. Well, next slide, I think we transition over to the business license and Eric Myers.
Thank you, Bobby and Ben. Appreciate it. All right. I'm going to go ahead with a few sort of broader statements, and we'll pass the baton to Ben a few times here to give us a more localized perspective. So the first thing that wanted to share with you all is that based on what we're seeing, and we have access to a large number of the actual returns in California and business license with our client base, we are seeing a return to pre-COVID levels in most areas in terms of business license revenue. Now, where that has not happened, it has typically been the result of caps that were built in, because what we saw during COVID to some degree was some market consolidation in terms of the number of employers. Some of the small businesses just didn't make it through the economic squeeze of COVID, despite a lot of the opportunities that were available to them. So I think the first question I'd want to pass over to Ben is, how did in terms of your business community, how do you feel they've recovered from the COVID-19 impact? What's your sense of the local recovery there?
I think it really depends on which sector you're talking about. I think the first thing that everybody always hears, and I've heard it now for about 2 years straight, is just how hard it is to get staffing. Still very hard, very much a challenge. Can't pay people enough. People have options, and it's still incredible to us how much that is a pull on our businesses. They just can't find the people. We have a number of businesses. In fact, we just had a business come before our Economic Development Commission not long ago, a retail establishment, and they actually just have kind of had to throw in the towel and say, we're only going to be open 4 hours a day because that's what we can staff. We have the customer demand to be open for 8, but we're going to be open for 4 because that's what we can provide. So it's shocking to me that that's still an issue, and though we're not in that sector, even on the city side, we really struggle in filling our posts all across the board too, and we pay well. We have good jobs.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. That's something we're seeing. That pressure economically on employment numbers, as well as cost of goods. And we've heard, as we worked through the tax study cycle with a number of our clients this past fall, who were going out to ballot measure, I mean, one of the big things was the impact on restaurants in particular has just continued on. So even though on paper it looks like there's a great recovery, more dependent you are on things like restaurants, right? If that's a big part of the economic sector, from my perspective, we're encouraging you to take a hard look at that. Their cost of goods are up, their wages are up, they're having a hard time with employment turnover, and that's an area to keep our eye on from an economic development perspective, which I'm sure you and Barry have some thoughts on as well. It looks like you have something else to share there, Ben.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned is hugely important. When you're in a staff level, to keep your policymakers informed of, right? They need to be aware as they consider changes in ordinance and fees. That you need to be constantly explaining to them how hard it is for your local businesses, because without your local businesses, you will not thrive. You know, for us in particular, you know, we lose our visitor stream. We wouldn't be able to serve the community. We would, you know, we can't, again, going back to the three-legged stool, we can't just survive with property tax and TOT. You know, sales tax, you know, is hugely important.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Let's go ahead to the next slide.
And Eric, a quick question for you coming from the audience. Is the chart that we're showing currently for the state or for the city of Pacific Grove?
Well, it's for the portion of the state that I have solid numbers for. So that's about 100 or so jurisdictions where we are involved in their business license administration. So it's a sample from the state, not from Pacific Grove.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification. So some key points to consider as we're looking in forecast season around business license. Home-based businesses, they may be flying under the radar. I met with a jurisdiction a few months ago, and it's a fairly well-to-do jurisdiction, and we were talking about the number of delivery vehicles that were coming into residential areas and whether that was a sign that we had more home-based businesses in those areas, and whether that was something that we needed to be acting on now or not, right? But the thing that we've seen for sure, well, I remember an article, I think it was last fall, may have even been last summer, there was a cleaning crew in one of the high rises in the city and county of San Francisco, and they happened to report somehow to a reporter that they hadn't seen anyone on that floor in the last 6 months, right? So we're talking about potentially a fundamental shift now in how people are working, whether and how often they commute, and where their home base actually is, right? And these are very interesting things to watch. I've noticed that if you have an older population, more in the services, financial, professional services arena, that you've just got a correlation with a potential for a higher number of people who've shifted their office technically to home. And that's something to look for in your business license. Not only are they zoned properly on the regulatory side, but is there revenue there that frankly the cities or county or jurisdiction is entitled to and is not being tracked right now. Another is very much related to this, and that is the delivery economy. We've begun to shift into a delivery-centric economy for consumer goods. And it remains to be seen how much of that will remain, but we're seeing fairly healthy amount of delivery continuing to go on. I mean, for example, in cannabis, I was talking to a jurisdiction where they don't allow cannabis retail businesses, but they're aware that retailers from outside their jurisdiction are delivering into their jurisdiction. How is that being addressed? Are you in fact getting your tax revenue from those delivery businesses who are using up some of the useful life of your roads, your infrastructure, right? So that's a key one. We have seen in the numbers, and I'll show it a little bit later, you know, there's been some upward pressure on the construction field because there's just too little supply in California in terms of housing. But we want to be careful around that. If you've got a lot of construction driving and propping up your business license, that's something to keep an eye on, right? Housing sales have significantly slowed in California over the last little bit. Whether that will continue probably is tightly coupled with the inflation and interest rates and wage growth. So we still need to be watching it. However, construction has been an area that, particularly in some areas with older demographics, there's been a rise in equity. People have been doing remodels, et cetera. That's great, but it isn't a long-term business base for you. So you want to be sensitive to that as well. We've talked about inflation. Bobby already covered that at a great length. Cost of goods we've mentioned. Employment trends, boy, this is one that I think, we have to watch really carefully. Right now, it looks like the employment is the key factor to watch, even if you're, say, on gross receipts or some sort of fixed fee structure for your business license, because it looks like employment is going to tell us whether the raising of the interest rates is going to, how much it's going to slow the economy. A lot of the recession that's been forecasted has been offset by a strong labor market right now. And yet, what's puzzling to me is locally, even though we've got low unemployment, we've got a difficult time keeping people in jobs. And those things aren't necessarily contradictory. It may just be that whoever's willing to raise their bets on how much they're willing to pay people will now go up, right? And so that is an interesting trend to watch, and I think is a key trend. And then demographics. Your demographics in your city are very important. We'll see in a minute that there's been inflation, pretty strong inflation in healthcare and drugs. If you've got an older population, is that hitting them in their pocketbooks more heavily? Both of my parents are retired, and I know that their key concern is their healthcare costs at their stage in life. So watching your demographic makeup as well, yeah, we may get a lot of rising equity and property tax, and that's great, but is it giving us enough fungible funds for that part of our economy to actually be able to get the services that they need? So those are some of the key ideas. I'll show you some charts in a second around that. I wanted to pause and see if Ben is seeing any of these play out in his local jurisdiction as well.
Yeah, I want to comment just on a couple parts of that. One is that people, I think, the theme is we see is people have options. And we draw from the Bay Area and San Jose. I don't, by the way, consider San Jose necessarily the Bay Area. They're kind of two distinct spots. But the world has changed, and I encounter people each week that are here in Pacific Grove doing some type of service from their home. Maybe they go to their office somewhere one day a week, wherever that is. Maybe they don't. Maybe they've just shifted entirely. So we have to really rethink what the world is and how we provide service as a city. These are people that now have time to walk around their neighborhood, to be out in the parks, to be on the street. And so, whereas before maybe they were, stuck in an office somewhere, they weren't paying as much attention, they're paying a lot more attention. So they're home a lot, they're looking at the services they receive, their quality of life, and this is what you're supposed to be using those revenues to provide for. So it's important.
Great comments. Thank you, Ben. And the interplay with infrastructure, I think, is just going to get even more important, not only within the city, but if we're going to support this kind of economy, then the transportation network has to be really robust, right? And so it points us towards a more regional view as well, that I think the local jurisdictions can speak to with a lot of experience and insight. All right, if we can advance, Taylor, to the next slide. So we've mentioned this, the delivery-based economy is growing. That's probably not a surprise. This is a forecast, so take it with a grain of salt, but it's forecasted to continue to grow. That will put pressure on the infrastructure as well. Next slide, please. Housing and sales and pricing, as you can see, what we're seeing in the heavy black line is home sales, and then median home price is behind in the gray scale bars. And you can see changes happening now where we're getting maybe a buildup or people are holding off on these purchases because of a little concern about, ooh, what's the economy going to do for the next little while? So I don't think what you're seeing is, oh, we built too many houses and there's not enough buyers. I think people are opting out of the market, but we'll see. But that puts some downward pressure in the construction arena as well. We'll see how that plays out over the next little while. Next slide, please, Taylor. We'll go ahead. Unemployment is low. Bobby already spent some time on that. This is, again, one of the key factors. I mean, I was just reading some articles in preparation coming into today from the Atlanta Fed, right? And, you know, we look okay if we're going to stick around 3.5, 4% unemployment. If it starts to creep up above that, there's some real questions about whether we'll then get some serious economic ramifications. Next slide. We are starting to see in California a little bit of an increase. I can't tell you whether it's statistically significant, but it is increasing a little bit. Something I don't show here that you may also want to pay attention to is taking a look at the labor participation rate, right? Some of this is artificially kept low by people who are just opting out of the labor market. Maybe taking a little bit of early retirement, maybe deciding not to work for a while, maybe to go back to school as well. So go ahead, Taylor, to the next slide. All right, just quickly on demographics. This is sort of a forecast, I think it was done in 2019 from, I took it from Cal Matters, but they're looking at the demographic shifts in California. And this is true nationally, but California, I read a provocative article that said, will California look like Florida in 10 years in terms of its demographic structure? The answer is no, but it will look more like Florida in terms of how much of its population is in the workforce. That is going to be, you know, unless we shift some of the demographics as they currently are, these are the trends, right? We've got some downward trending in terms of we are aging, excuse me. Some have called it the silver tsunami, right? And that's something that we want to keep an eye on too, because as you get to that stage, you may be shifting what your purchase looks like and what your business activity looks like as well. Next slide, please. And then pending recession, this is really just a forecast of recession probability. It keeps getting pushed out. I first looked at this last fall, and it keeps getting pushed out. So I would take that with a grain of salt, but there does seem to be a sense, as we saw from you today, that, hey, we're still uncertain about the future. It's definitely going to be slower. Will it actually be a recession? Remains to be seen. Ben, any thoughts on how you and your team at the city are looking at the potential for a recession?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is you have to be candid with your policymakers, your city council members, if you're at the city level. You need strong fiscal policies. And one thing we've done here in Pacific Grove is we have a 35% general fund reserve policy. And that allowed us to weather the last pandemic, and it will allow us to weather the next pandemic. You know, having that cash on hand is important. The other thing is you need to have very strong relationships with your employee associations, which we do here in Pacific Grove, because the majority of your costs, of course, are for salaries and benefits. We all know that. And, you know, if you need to reduce your expenses, it's obvious where that's going to come from, right? It's going to come from your employee associations. The last pandemic, we had a citywide furlough with a scale of up to 20%. We only went from 5 to 10, but because of those important relationships that we keep from the management side with our associations, we were able to get buy-in, even on the public safety side, to implement those furloughs, because that meant that people weren't losing jobs. It did mean that less was getting done, of course, and so there was also a community buy-in as well. We had to make sure that the community was understanding of that, and they were. But, you know, so I guess that's the main comment is, you know, have strong fiscal policies like a reserve policy. It's got to be something robust, like 35% of your general fund. And then again, never underestimate the relationship with your employees and your employee associations. Totally critical.
Oh, great insights. Thank you, Ben. Taylor, next slide. So, and then I think I'm pretty much done here. We will look in terms of business license transfer forecasting. We've covered all of this. in more detail, but the bottom line that I'm seeing and when I'm doing forecasts working with our clients is your best bet is to look like you're going to be pretty flat on business license revenue for 23-24. Most of the jurisdictions I'm looking at are trending. Most of the growth is actually attributable to inflation on the gross receipts side. We aren't seeing huge spikes in employment numbers, as been noted before. We're seeing churn, so people are still just trying to fill positions. So, the general idea is to probably be conservative in your forecast. Better off to be conservative. I don't think the sky is falling yet, but as Bobby mentioned, right? It with inflation and with with slowing growth, it's going to feel like a recession, whether it technically is one or not. So, and then Taylor, I think next slide. And there we go. Thank you, Ben, for your insights on that, and I'll pass it over to Barry.
Great. So again, my name is Barry Foster. I'm the Principal Managing Director for our Economic Development Division, Econ Solutions, which I started about 9 years ago. We've done work for about 185 local governments, a lot of cities, but some kinds and some special districts. But on average, we probably work for 30 to 35 different cities, some ongoing relationships and some special projects. So I'm going to go through just some high-level discussion about some of the trends we're seeing from an economic perspective, and then kind of talk about some of the things that we've done with Ben and Pacific Grove, and try to kind of tie that to the local level there in Pacific Grove. So again, both Bobby and Eric talked about some of these trends, but inflation, but especially the just increased cost of doing businesses, they've had a huge impact on the business community, especially for small businesses. And so they just haven't been able to increase prices to what they really need to do. And so those costs of businesses really has an impact, especially on small businesses. Talked about labor shortages and labor cost increases. This is huge, and this is all over the state, but especially in the restaurant industry. Just keeping people being able to afford them has been huge for restaurants, and then you can tie that back to Pacific Grove. That's had a huge influence, and Ben's talked about that earlier today. Supply chain disruptions with the pandemic. It's been all kinds of times and how long it takes to get things if you're buying things online or just trying to get something in a store. This has had a huge impact on doing business. And we talk about just more of a shift to do online shopping and the impact that's had on brick and mortar, and especially small businesses and how they're able to deal with that. Just the new normal. There's a lot of different things that are really in play, and they're here for forever. It's changed just the way we look at things and how businesses operate and do business. Talked about outdoor dining. Ben talked about that earlier, and their Parklet program. That's something that people were really forced to do when the pandemic, when they couldn't have people inside and tried to do things outside. I think we enjoy that benefit in California and a lot of places with really good weather. But Ben's talked about keeping their Parklet program. We're working with Menlo Park in Silicon Valley. They're formalizing their outdoor dining program. They call it Streeteries, to continue that on and make those guidelines and requirements for outdoor dining permanent now that the pandemic is over. And so I think that's a trend statewide that people are looking at. Ben talked about it. It puts more people in restaurants, gives more opportunities for them to have more customers and increase their revenues, and that's hugely important for restaurants, especially independent-owned small restaurants. Just the whole, Kirk talked about it briefly. Where people are working, I mean, that's changed everywhere. Some people are working fully remote from home. Some are working hybrid. Just with HDL, we have people that come. We're doing a lot of hybrid work and remote work, and so and maybe they're coming in the office 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and you know, no one really knows what that daytime population. You get into the Silicon Valley and some of the areas that rely heavily on tech employment. What is that daytime population? Nobody really knows what that is because everybody's doing these hybrid, trying to get people to come back. And so that's something that's going to be around for a while, and just kind of understanding how that affects your business community, especially that daytime population, which is huge. And then just the different changing spending habits, what people are buying, and what they're spending their money on. I think you really need to have a kind of understanding of that and how that affects your business community. These are all things that are really important, and they have a huge impact on your business community. Next slide, please. Again, I talked about the impact is, you know, Bobby talked about it, especially that we saw the bounce back from when we hit the real low with the pandemic kind of early on, when things were shut down and there was the state had restrictions on who could operate and have people and all those kinds of things with their businesses, especially restaurants. We've seen a bounce back and recovery, but now we're projecting that this next fiscal year is going to be fairly flat, and then we're going to kind of have some moderate growth. And so I think it's great that sales tax is back up again for so many cities and so many clients, but that's not the true indicator that especially small businesses, they're still struggling, especially restaurants, retailers, and personal service providers. They are not able to pass all those costs on to their consumers, to their customers. They are not back to pre-pandemic in terms of cash flow and proper margins. And I think it's critical now to support your small businesses, especially, and just help them to really truly recover and avoid those closures and vacancies. When you have vacancies, especially in a downtown area, that's a huge challenge. You're reducing the number of people that are there. You want to make sure that you're supporting those small businesses, those independent businesses. They still have a lot to do in terms of recovery. Next slide, please. So here's just a few things that we kind of suggest that make sense now. I think now is a critical time. It's a very important time to focus on economic development. That's a chance for you to help your business community and help grow your revenues. And so these are just a few things that we advocate and that I would suggest. Now's the time to talk about that recovery. You can look at doing a small business recovery action plan or doing an economic development action plan to really focus on the next couple of years, the next year, the next 2 years, 3 years out in terms of what you want to focus on in terms of economic development and helping your business community. Another important thing is doing a shop local program. We've done a number of these as a company where we worked with a company called Yifty, who's does digital gift card programs. They've done 500 of these nationally. They've done 250 in California. We have a partnership agreement with them. We've done 20 of these. I think we have 10 going on currently, and we've got 3 or 4 more that we're talking about doing that. But it's kind of a high-tech way to go ahead and do these digital gift cards where you don't have a plastic card. Really easy to use, and it helps stimulates and incentivize people to shop local and to use those participating merchants that are restaurants, retailers, the nail salons, the barber, those personal services, the gyms, keeping those dollars local. And it's really, really important to be doing that now. And it's to help with retail recruitment in your community. I think those cities that are proactive, that do have vacancies, you're working with the developers and those shopping center owners to help fill those spaces up. You're doing everything you can to help encourage attracting new businesses to fill up vacancies and keep your community and your business community vibrant. And then understanding your market analytics. We use a demographic and market analytics package called Insight to really know everything about your community, and that's helping your shopping center owners, helping your property and your business property owners, helping those people that are looking at your community to open a new business. They're not coming to City Hall anymore. They're doing the stuff online. And so there's market analytics you can have on your website, and it's very current and fresh data, but it gives them a real understanding about your community and what the makeup is. And then we've done a lot of highest and best use market studies to take maybe an older shopping center and look at trying to reposition or a piece of property that maybe needs to be redeveloped, to look at those opportunities to make to kind of refresh those areas and make them more productive. And then revenue option studies. We did one for Goleta last year. We're looking at doing another one now. Is looking at sales tax measures, increasing your transit occupancy tax, doing a TUT, a transaction use tax, a utility user tax. Look at all those kinds of things, and we can come in and help look at analyzing those options and give cities and elected officials all the different options to look at, and have them kind of focus on what makes sense for them. You're looking at what's regressive, what's not regressive, or less regressive, looking at the possibility of how it could get passed, but it gives them all the information to make some of those kinds of decisions on what option in terms of a new revenue makes sense for them. Next slide, please. So here's some of the things that we actually did in Pacific Grove with Ben and his community. So I talked about the Insight Market Analytics package. So this is something that we have for them for 3 different areas of the community. They're downtown and 2 other areas. It's on their website. It's really easy for them. We update it every 6 months, but it gives somebody that's looking to put a business or a developer looking to come in and do a project in Pacific Grove. It gives them all the market analytics, not just demographics, but it gets into that daytime population. It gets into where people are spending their money on, what's leaking out. It's a consumer supply and demand and market assessment. But it's a real kind of critical tool to have to really show who you are. And then we worked with them, and they used some other entities too to help with this, but to revamp their website for economic development, and to have a standalone website that's tied to their city website. Really easy to do, to use and navigate. It's easy to keep fresh and up to date, but it gives people a real opportunity to understand about what kind of opportunities are available in terms of economic development and new business in Pacific Grove. And again, people are doing this online. They're not coming to City Hall and doing this anymore. And then we actually did Ben talked about his half-cent sales tax increase that they had. And so before they did that, we actually did a resident versus non-resident analysis to estimate the percentage of sales tax that comes from non-residents. It's fairly high in Pacific Grove because of their tourism based. And so it's a little bit easier when you're talking about doing a sales tax increase, when you're saying that 50 or 60% of that is actually coming from non-residents. Those people are not voting. It's the residents are voting. So I think having that analysis and that number can really help in terms of looking at a sales tax increase. We're doing it. We actually have a draft, and we've taken it to the city council for a small business recovery action plan. And I think that's looking at ways that the city can deal with, okay, now we're coming out of COVID. What do we need to do in terms of helping our small businesses recover? And so I think that will be a guide and provide a roadmap for them to take the next couple of years to really see their small businesses recover to where they need to be. They have a few vacancies in their downtown that we're talking to an individual that has a maker space. They have 4 of them actually in the San Jose area, so they're interested in Pacific Grove to use that kind of on a temporary basis, to come in and provide a maker space where people are actually making things and then selling them. And so it's kind of a new creative way to look at some of those vacancies rather than having to sit there vacant. We've done broker lunch programs in Pacific Grove. We try to do these every 6 months, and I think they just had one here a month ago, and Ben can talk about that too. But I think they had 10 different local brokers. They had some developers and some property owners and some council members and Economic Development Commission members that all came together along with staff to really talk about what's happening there, and but more importantly, to hear from them, to understand, are there some things the city can be doing better and help with any kind of challenges that they might have. It's always better to hear those things in that kind of setting than it is when you hear somebody's closing or they're relocating the facility. You want to know that up front. And then we talked about earlier about the Shop Local digital gift card program. That's also something that we're going to be recommending as part of the Small Business Recovery Action Plan there in Pacific Grove, and bring that forward to their city council. We talked about it before, but now we'll have some more of the specifics in terms of how that can work and the kind of positive impact it might have on the community, especially those small businesses that will participate in that program. So with that, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Bannon and give him a chance to kind of weigh in on some of the things I talked about, and he's got a few things he wants to talk about too. You go to the next slide, too.
Yeah, go to the next slide. I think what I want to stress is that as a city manager, you can't put enough emphasis on economic development. It should be one of the most, one of your top priorities. It really has to be. Here in Pacific Grove, we're a little small town, 15,000 people. We have about 100 full-time employees. So we don't have our own dedicated economic development department. We don't have an economic development director. So we rely upon HDL, Econ Solutions, to be, our subject matter expert. I'm very fortunate because we have a citizens advisory body, an economic development commission. Our Chamber of Commerce president is one of the board members. They're very passionate, they're energized, and they offer recommendations to me and the city council. Those relationships with those economic development commissioners are huge, because it's better for me to go to my city council with the backing of the Economic Development Commission on something. It gives me credibility that, the EDC, as we call it, as the voice of the community, is recommending this action for the city council to consider. I want to talk a little bit more about something we did earlier that Barry mentioned. It's this standalone website. We named it pickpg.org. And what I heard over the years, and I'm in my 8th year here as city manager, was, businesses really needed some type of one-stop shop. It needed to be easy for them to go to one location to figure out what to do, who to talk to, what are their requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So we developed this standalone webpage called pickpg.org, and it's designed for existing and for prospective business owners to come in. How do I pay my business license tax? What's the zoning in the city? Where are the commercial districts? But really, one of the most important things we put on that website, which was harder to do, was a list of available properties, including the commercial broker attached to the property and their contact info, the square footage, and whether there's water available at the site or not, the allowed uses. That's provided by our Chamber of Commerce, and it's a joint effort to keep this website going. But I think that's been a huge tool that we've created that is now available. The other thing we've done, and again, going back to the fact that we don't have a dedicated economic development department or a director, is we had to get creative here as to who could be our point person to serve, in the economic development capacity besides myself. And so we have a planner in our community development department. Her name is Laurel O'Halloran. She happens to be a small business owner herself outside of her work for the city. So she has a business owner mindset, and she has a planning background, which is kind of a unique combination, so that when somebody goes to her with a business question, she knows how to talk about the land use, the permitting, and even the feasibility, because that also is a big question we get too. So having Laurel serve in this capacity 1 day a week as an economic development coordinator has been very, very helpful. So thank you, Barry. I mean, it's really kind of this patchwork quilt of effort, just always keeping it front and center, knowing that that's one of the most important things that you can do as city managers, to focus on economic development. Back to you, Barry.
That's all I've got, but I think we'll just give it back to you, Taylor.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. Just jumping back on screen here. Thank you, everybody. We will now transition into our Q&A portion of the presentation. So we encourage any of our audience members who may not have had a chance to please submit questions via the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your webinar panel. But we have received a few questions to get us started. So for our panelists here, obviously, welcome any responses related to these questions, and I'll kind of let you all decide who might want to take the first swing at this this initial question. But one of our audience members asks, can tax rebates be a part of a retail recruitment program, or are there any other incentives for new businesses that you might be able to share with our audience?
I think I'll take that one. Yeah, you can look at doing some of those kinds of things. You have to be careful about if a business is relocating from another community to your community. There's some state law that doesn't allow that to happen. If it's a brand new business and not having an impact, you can look at those things. You need to kind of understand and weigh the need to do that kind of thing, and I guess how badly you want that business, and do they really have a need to have some kind of a sales tax sharing agreement. It's something that was done, a lot years ago. It's done less frequently now. So I guess my answer would be you need to kind of pick and choose when you do that, and you have to make sure that that you're legally able to do it too.
Absolutely. Thank you for those insights, Barry. That's really helpful. We also received a few questions from our audience ahead of the webinar today about the kind of small town business and revenue building experience. And so one question that I think kind of helps capture this, with small towns that might have limited retail or limited office space, are there any strategies that you all might be able to offer that might help kind of stabilize or potentially increase revenue for those small towns that might have that more limited capacity?
I could start with that. It's a great question. That's something we all struggle with. I think one thing that we look at, and it sort of helps a little bit, if nothing else, it gets your community in the mindset of others, is special events are a way that you can do that. Building them around other special events. For instance, we have here in the Monterey Peninsula, we have Car Week every year, and there's a lot of people that come into town for that, trying to get synergy around that and doing things that kind of complement that. The other thing I think that you can do is and we're experimenting with this here a little bit, is having pop-up businesses. The things that are just there for a very short period of time. There's low risk for or a small risk for the person putting that together. Maybe there's a temporary opportunity for them to be in a location. It could even potentially be on public property if you get your policymakers to agree to allow that type of thing. That's another option. I'd like to hear from the other panelists, that have experience elsewhere in the state in this one though too.
Yeah, I would agree that I think what Ben talked about, having special events and community events, that's huge. I think that even if you do have a small business space, I think it's important to have that, especially if you have a downtown area like in Pacific Grove and other places. And we work with Menlo Park, and so again, they're downtown. They're looking at ways to try to energize that downtown, especially at night, and keeping people there. They renovated and did an older theater, and renovated and opened that back up again. So they're having more and more of that at night now. But those community events and special events are huge, because they get people to come there and they see, oh, I didn't know that those businesses were there, and they come back again and again. And so I think those are really important to have for those, drawing people into the community. I just think there's lots of different ways that you can do that. And as Ben talked about, pop-up businesses and those kinds of things, I think are also important. I had a Zoom meeting with a very small city in Southern California yesterday that 95% of their community is behind gates, and so they basically have one about a 25-acre shopping center, and so, but they're looking at at doing, a master plan for that shopping center, and to have, part of it maybe be redeveloped with housing. And so they have a desperate need for more housing in that community, and having the mixed use, and that the housing then can help fund for a renovation and other parts of it, bring in some new uses. But I think mixed use is really important going forward. I think the importance of housing in California is especially important. Ben's seeing that in Pacific Grove, where they're having more residential now be built in their downtown area. You can't just, you have to remember that online shopping is only going to get bigger. And so, California, we have too much retail to begin with in a lot of areas. And so kind of reimagining that and reposition some of those areas, bringing in more rooftops, you bring in more consumers. That's what's happening in Menlo Park. They've a lot of new housing there to help with their existing businesses, to help support them and make sure that that's right. So mixed use is really important. You want to make sure you're not just a bedroom community, that you have a daytime and a nighttime population.
If I could just go back to what Barry was talking about a little bit on the special event front, there's a city near Pacific Grove. It's called Sand City. It's a tiny little city, and you can have a special event that actually is pretty impactful in a small space. They take a parking lot in the middle of their town, and I think it's one day a month they have what they call a night market, and it's a bunch of local merchants. Not all of them have storefronts, and they throw out some picnic tables. They've got food. They've got crafts, they've got activities, and this parking lot is probably, I don't know, a very small parking lot. Anyway, there was 500 people probably at this event the other weekend when I went, and it was 4 or 5 hours. I'm sure that was beneficial to Sand City. I would love to have something like that in Pacific Grove.
Absolutely.
I would also add, just very briefly, it might be worth taking a look at your business license ordinance as well, if you have one, your business tax structure, right? How difficult is it to get these kinds of community activities up and going? Do you have to jump through 20 hoops to do that, right? A lot of the ordinances written in the 60s were really concerned that this kind of thing not really happen, right? Unless you signed everything in triplicate. So take a look at that as well.
Just sorry on that topic, I think that's why it's always also really important to have a point person. So again, we have Laurel on our side, this economic development coordinator. I mean, she only does that function one day a week, but you can get to Laurel from our Pick PG website. We try to put her front and center. You have a business question, have a great idea, call Laurel, email Laurel, text Laurel, and start with her, just so somebody's on point that can run with it, just to make, and then because she understands to what Eric's talking about, all the regulations, not only can she help navigate that, but also she can come to me and say, hey, we have this ridiculous requirement for this type of event, and there's no reason for it. Let's look at streamlining it. Let's see if we can revise that to make it easier for people to use.
Definitely. Thank you all for those insights. That's really, really helpful. And I think hopefully gives our audience members some really concrete takeaways when they're thinking about how to leverage their small town communities and their business communities. I am going to just kind of combine a couple of questions here around business licenses and compliance. We had an earlier question around any strategies for trying to work with businesses that might not be in compliance with their licenses and how that is enforced, any strategies for that. And then a follow-up question that just came from the audience, does HDL companies offer compliance services? Either one of those questions or both, I'll turn it over to you all.
Sure. So business license compliance, I think that's me. So yeah, the short answer is yes, we do offer those services, and we are finding them to be more important as part of the policy decision making that a city looks at, right? One of the things we're finding is that the policymakers in your city, particularly, I mean, you heard from Barry, you heard from Ben, you heard from Bobby, different parts of the economy are not as recovered as the aggregate numbers, would lead you to believe. And so before you start saying, well, hey, let's raise taxes on across our business community, it's really important to be able to look at the policymakers and say, we think we've leveled the playing field, right? In every community that I've worked with, there are these loud voices from the business community, and they should be loud, saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm paying my taxes. Are you sure everybody is, right? Because, particularly with the problems that we've talked about and the concerns around the labor market and the cost of goods, that little bit can matter, that little competitive edge. So we definitely think looking at compliance is an important arrow in your quiver, so to speak, when you're looking both at tax policy and at the revenue. In terms of strategy, how much of our secret sauce do I want to give away? What I would say strategically, right, is you're looking. You need to look at some of the network. Can you talk to existing businesses and who are their vendors? It's likely those vendors are servicing other businesses, and you can do some work there. Another good one is to make sure that whatever your strategy is includes looking online, right? As more and more advertising has shifted online, making sure that we're looking at sources that are online as well. And then quite frankly, in California, one of the biggest areas, and I don't think it's intentional, it's just an educational issue, right? And that's probably the biggest strategy, is make sure that whatever you do, it comes from an educational standpoint, right? We're going to find those, we're going to treat you as if you just didn't know and help you get into compliance rather than wagging our finger and trying to chase you to the bank, right? So if you take that educational approach, one of the things that we find almost without exception across regions in California is that you have people who are either renting out residential, typically it's residential property, that have never considered themselves a business. And that is an area that we find a lot of success for our clients in. It can be politically very sensitive, so it needs to be done intentionally. And it's also hampered to a certain degree by this picture of, the little old lady who's renting out her home, and that's her retirement. That's really the picture from the 1960s. And you've got huge amounts of venture capital flooding in to residential rental over the last 5 to 10 years. And we need to update our mental models as well. These aren't just a single person. Some of them are, but there's big money in residential rental investment in California.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eric, for addressing those questions. That's incredibly helpful. Moving on here, obviously we heard from several of you throughout the panel discussion around the cost of goods and kind of the reality of that. We did get a question from our audience about, we all understand that the dramatic rise in costs for small businesses, along with the limited ability for those businesses to really raise prices to keep pace. Is there anything that local agencies can do to help with that issue that businesses are experiencing?
I'll start. I mean, I don't know that it's this kind of sounds like a lame response, but I think it's one of the most important things. You just need to be in communication and in touch with these businesses. You need to have relationships with them. They need to be able to know you when you walk in. Oh yeah, here he is, his city manager. He's coming here again. And you might not have something that you can give them at that moment, but you're an ear and you're aware of their concern. Nothing else you can. You can pass on their concern to your policymakers so that everybody is mindful about it. You can pass it on to your subject matter experts like HDL, and oftentimes, it takes a village of people to figure out what the resolution is. But just being there to be that receptacle and to understand and to keep it at the forefront and to keep sharing that with others is I find to be hugely important. The other thing is I also like to have a good relationship with the Chamber of Commerce so that I can go to them and say, I'm hearing this, is that something that you're hearing? Oh, okay, you have been hearing that too. All right, well, what are your ideas? I mean, it's just, it takes constant efforts, listening and then trying to work with others. That's all I can really offer there.
And I'll just add on to what Ben said too. I think that, I think getting feedback from your business community is really, really important. So, and we talked about doing the broker lunches there, but and Ben does another one kind of on an informal basis with a lot of other communities where they have quarterly roundtables with their business community. They bring in 10 or 12 different restaurants for a 1-hour lunch, and the city gives a little bit about what's going on, but more importantly, you're listening from them. And so I think it's important to make sure that you hear from them ahead of time before, if they're struggling or if they have some kind of a challenge the city might help with, before they decide they're going to close or they're going to relocate or something like that. So I think it's important to have those relationships, whether it's a formal program or informal. The other thing I would touch upon is, I talked about it earlier, is having a real emphasis on shop local. I think that the digital gift card programs that we've done, it's been amazing for me to see how successful these have been. We did a very successful one in Upland. We did one in Lake Forest. They've already did $500,000 in gift card sales, and they're doing another $500,000 that they're kicking off their second phase here in a couple of weeks. And so, but we've done them in big cities of a couple 100,000, but we've done them in the small city of Angels Camp, 2,800 up in the Sierra foothills. They sold out their first phase in 8 days, and then they did a second phase. And when they came to us, they said, "Do you think we're too small?" And I said, "No." And they had 20 different participating merchants. I think now they've got like 28. And so I think that's huge. So it can be, it's not a one size fits all. I think having that emphasis on your small businesses, shop local. These are not the McDonald's and the Walmarts. These are the small independent owned businesses. Those businesses are still struggling. Their margins are not being attained. They're not cash flowing to where they were pre-pandemic. Anything you can do to keep your people spending their money in your community is important. So we like the digital gift card programs because it's kind of a high-tech way to do it. But it's especially now, we're talking about 0.5% growth in terms of sales tax in the next fiscal year, or basically being flat. Now is the time to be doing those kinds of things. I think that keeping people spending their money, they want to spend their money, make sure they keep it and spend it in the community where they live. And you can bring some people from outside the community, all the better.
Yeah, I'll add to Barry real quickly. I've had the privilege of supporting Barry's team on a couple of projects that we've done, and I think this dovetails nicely with what Ben and Barry have said, which is, look, I mean, if you want to get the best kind of compliance program there is, offer a grant or a program, and people will voluntarily disclose themselves, right? And really, local jurisdictions are in this incredible place where they have the local knowledge, but they can also be an aggregator of information and resources and what's available, like Ben talked about with his economic development expert on staff, right? Of, well, what might be available? What are the helps? Are there grants out there? How are we communicating with our transportation folks to make sure that there's a regional plan that allows that small business greater access to the labor market within a reasonable commute time? Those are all key things that I think local jurisdictions can play a real leadership role in for their business community.
If I could just add on to that, and Ben talked about it earlier too, is having that point person there is really important, because you have somebody that wants to open a business, and they go, "Why do I have to do this?" Before I went to work for HCL, I worked for 4 different states in California, and I would go and work for a new community, and I would have people that would work for me, and I would go, "Why do we do this?" And the answer oftentimes was, "We always have." That's the wrong answer. That's the absolute wrong answer. If you can show it to me, there's a code, there's a government law, there's some reason why we need to do it, we'll consider that. If we always have done it, that's not a good answer. So understanding how you can help your business community, help make it easier for them to open a business or keep a business. That's huge, and that will pay off many, 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 many times.
Thank you so much, Barry. I really appreciate you rounding us out on that discussion. And thank you to all of you for responding to all of our audience questions. There were a few more that, of course, we didn't get to, but we'll be sure to share those with our panelists and hopefully get some answers for you all in that follow-up email that we will send in the coming days. So just a few wrap-up slides here just for our folks still on the line. We have a few resources if you would like to check these out. Our affiliates that we mentioned earlier are great resources for cities, counties, and special districts. And then also the municipal finance resources. These organizations here are also a great place for learning a little bit more about the different topics we talked about today. We, of course, will just have a quick plug for ILG and some different ways to stay engaged with us via our newsletter, our social media. So be sure to find us there and stay in touch with all of our upcoming events, just like this one. And just to lastly reiterate, this recording will be available soon. We'll be sharing that via email in the next week or so. So just keep an eye out for that. And I will just close by saying thank you all so much for joining us. I'll give our panelists, if there are any last thoughts you all would like to share, please feel free to do so now.
I just want to thank ILG for the opportunity, and thank all of our participants for the great questions. It's always good to talk about what we do and why we do it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the thank you for the opportunity to provide information, and hopefully we're of help.
Definitely. Thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon.